Welcome to Big Brave Business. This is the podcast where we answer big questions reshaping entrepreneurship. I'm Sarah K. Heeter, and this is Season 3. Each week, I'm bringing on my friends, mentors, and some of the best thought leaders I know. We dive into bold, values-driven conversations about leadership, equity, ethics, and building businesses that actually make a difference. Ready to do business better? Let's dive in. Welcome back to Big Brave Business. This is a juicy one today. We're talking about capitalism, and I want to just briefly call back before we introduce who's even speaking on the call today. I want to briefly call back this episode from season 1 when Amanda and I were talking about marketing and religious extremism and cults and capitalism and how they're all linked. And she had kind of stopped me in my ranting and said, "Hey, what do you mean when you're talking about capitalism?" And it just kind of opened for me this sort of understanding that we all throw words around with kind of an assumption that people are making the same assumptions we are when we use terminology. And I think there's a lot more to kind of dig into there. So anyways, we're going to be talking about that today and just kind of how it affects us as small business owners and what kind of other alternative options there might be. But before we do that, let's get a brief introduction to everybody whose voices you're going to be hearing. I'm going to start because I'm the host of the podcast. If you're new here, my name is Sarah. I am the CEO and founder of a podcast production and strategic consultation company called Podfox Media.
I'm Susana. I am the founder of Untangling Ideas, a marketing and branding agency that helps small businesses figure out how to talk about themselves in a way that doesn't feel icky.
I'm Siobhan. I'm a mentor for change makers based in the UK, and I help you raise your voice and lead the change. Sums it up.
Taina. I am one of the co-founders of Theory of Change Consulting. We help leaders and their teams make values-aligned decisions so they can do good work.
Sounds like a pretty aligned group here. I'm very excited to dig into this. So our big question of the day is, can capitalism be revolutionized? And what alternative economic models should we explore?
Can I read off the definition before we jump in? I'm sure we all have a lot to say, and I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say. So I pulled it up just to make sure, like you said, Sarah, sometimes we're throwing terminology around and definitions can change based on experience, right? And also just based on knowledge. And so one of the main definitions of capitalism is a socioeconomic system based on private property rights, including the private ownership of resources or capital. When they say capital, they mean money, usually, or it can be other types of resources like labor, with economic decisions made largely through the operation of a market unregulated by the state. So deregulation or the ability for different industries to be unregulated is one of the facets of capitalism.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that's really helpful because then we just have a place to start with of how's capitalism defined, especially kind of how it was probably introduced to us from more of a classroom lens, especially if you studied it in higher education. But I'm curious too, just from a definition standpoint, when you hear the term capitalism, what does that mean for each of you? What do you think of it meaning when you just hear it?
I think of really extractive, exploitative, unequal system where the 1% are rinsing everybody else. That's what comes to my mind.
I think about the fact that you talked about grade school, how much we were fleeced. Because when I used to think of capitalism, it was the only economic system that makes any sense, because that's what they teach, right? Obviously democracy and obviously capitalism. And then as I've gotten older, I'm wait. This is just a list of myths of things that we were taught to accept and swallow so that we would push aside things that were actually better for us and historically prioritized, like focusing on the communal, ancestral wisdom. Like the list is infinite, and I'm sure we'll get into all of it. But so when I think of capitalism, it's almost like what I used to think it was, and now it's like the kind of makes you throw up a little bit in your mouth. Like, is there a way out? Because this is working against all of us, except for that 1%.
Except for those who have like ownership, right? Over things. They're doing great. It's the rest of us that are struggling. I agree. I hear capitalism and it gives me the ick. And I think in a lot of countries, and I'm here in the United States, so I'm speaking as an American, someone who was born and raised here. There's this myth of democracy, this myth of capitalism, that if you just work hard, you pay your dues, like you will get yours eventually. And I think one of the insidious things about capitalism is that definition, or the way that it's talked about in that way, is not the whole truth. Like there's a part of it that's like, okay, that it disregards the conversation about power and privilege and how those two things play a part in sustaining capitalism. So if you come from a place of power and privilege and you engage in capitalism, it's going to work out for you. But the less power and privilege that you have, the harder it is to access things inside of a capitalistic system that will make your life be fruitful or feel fruitful. And so there's this really big gap between those who see capitalism working out for them and those who don't. And you brought up school, Sarah, and Susana, you both brought up school, like education. And I remember sitting in a history of education class in college and finding out that public schools were only created to train kids how to be better employees in industry during the Industrial Revolution. So even the way that our educational system is set up here in the United States and maybe even abroad in other countries, it's embedded into the capitalist system. So why would they teach us that there are other ways to live in a system of commerce or in an economic system outside of capitalism if it's for their benefit, for us to be good workers, to be able to sit still for 8 hours a day or 9 hours a day or 10 hours a day and be productive citizens, productive students, to make somebody else wealthy, to trade our labor for some kind of monetary exchange that is not equitable. And so when I hear capitalism, it one gives me the ick, like I just like cringe. And also I'm just like, there's, like Susana brought up, and I'm definitely gonna mispronounce your name, Siobhan. Okay. Like they said, like there are so many other ways to participate in a system of commerce that are just not talked about enough in a lot of like Western civilized developed countries.
Yeah, this is very interesting already. And as always, I mean, all three of you, like anytime I talk to you, so much comes up for me that I'm just like, okay, I'm already just obsessed with you. Like, this is such an interesting conversation. Those are my favorite things. But it's what's coming up for me that's notable is that my own personal response to that question of like what comes up for me. I mean, capitalism as like an economic theory, I feel vaguely, I would say like just off center of neutral toward feeling the ick about like the concept, but the myth and the system and structure we live in, total ick, like total ick. And I think that for me, what kind of comes up when we kind of throw this term around is really related to what you were saying, Taina, most of all, which is that it's really about accessibility, because based on that definition you were talking about of like, essentially, how do you assign, and this is totally paraphrased, but like, how do you assign value based on, of course, like the economic ideas of supply and demand to goods and services and resources including labor, and then exchanging those resources. Like if we had an equal opportunity to access resources, then capitalism on its own, I think, like, has an opportunity to be explored, but we know that that's fundamentally untrue. And basically, this kind of concept that if you already have access to resources, then you get to use capitalism as a way to manipulate other people so that you can continue to have more resources, and you will take their resources in order to do so. That's the part that like feels extremely broken. I don't know, like, I'm not an economist, and I think that's really important to kind of call out is like there's a lot of like really high levels of education and like political engagement among the people on this call, but everyday people are experiencing and influenced by these systems, and they're part of these systems, and they're participating whether they want to or not, and but to different degrees. And I think that one of the things that I really stress about calling for guests on these podcasts is like, when we're talking about these big questions, you don't have to come to the conversation with the answers. You just have to be willing to explore the question and how it affects you. So somebody listening to this, including people on this call, may listen to what I say and think like, yeah, you have a pretty fundamental base understanding of these concepts, but like you could learn more. That's absolutely true. But I think that's probably true for a lot of the people who are listening as well. So I just kind of want to also say like, hey, we're all here in this together. Let's explore it.
We're absolutely here in this together. There is so much that I don't know. And that's part of why I think it's great that you're always having these conversations. But as you were talking, a few things came up for me. And I think it's worth noting probably why you have a neutral-ish response to capitalism. Yes, school, but also capitalism is a race to the bottom. So it started probably like bad, but not that bad. We are now in late stage capitalism, meaning we've been doing this for a while. And there's only so long that you can say, we need to increase profitability. Our shareholders insist on more profits, more profits, more profits. Well, the only way to do that is to cut your expenses, right? And increase revenue. And every time you do that, you're either paying your employees less, you're paying your suppliers less, who are then paying people overseas that are creating products less. So like really all of the people doing the actual work are making less and less and less and less, while to make that margin bigger, then the prices are going up. So now the people are making less, so they have less money to actually purchase the products that are being produced. And so you're in this system that is like absolutely not sustainable, not for consumers, not for workers, not for the environment, not for anything. And so I think that's why we're seeing more of a reaction to capitalism than we ever did in our youth. And I don't necessarily think it's because the world is turning more liberal. It's because as like capitalism is starting to lose its luster for more and more people, because we talked about the people that have privilege and can use capitalism. The further along we go, the smaller that group gets, right? So there are people that probably 20, 30 years ago were in that group that aren't anymore, and they're suddenly feeling it. And so I just feel like that's a necessary distinction to talk about. It's not an economic system that goes unchanged. Like it continues to devolve and get worse. And so if people are feeling some kind of way and feel like life is harder now, it's because it is. So to validate that as well.
Yeah, that's so true. I think like when you look back at what people were able to do with their earnings 30, 40 years ago, sustain in a home on one salary, being able to afford healthcare, being able to afford a car, not necessarily a car, but like getting to work like now. And you know, that thing of like going to university, when you go to university, you'll get a job afterwards. Like now you look at like our generation and maybe the next generation, and they're all going, what's the fucking point? Like, I'm either going to have to be self-employed and gig economy. I'm never going to be able to afford a house. I can barely afford to live. Like, the system isn't working. So a lot of people are starting to wake up to that, with people like Gary Stevenson talking about stuff. I think it's becoming a bit more mainstream, questioning this, like, the propaganda against other economic systems, where as kids, we were all, particularly in the UK and the US, I think socialism was aligned so much with kind of a communist approach. Whereas actually what socialism is a more democratic society where more people have a right to say how things work. Grace Blakely was talking about this on her podcast or in an interview recently. She's an economist. If anybody wants to follow her, she gives a really broad understanding. She gives you a really she simplifies things and makes it really, sorry, it's 10 o'clock here, so my brain is starting to die. Oh, it's 10:30. But yeah, there's so much you can learn from, like, Gary Stevenson and Grace Blakely. They are brilliant economics experts. And Gary used to work in the, like, trading, I never know what it's called because I'm not in that world, but like bankers, traders, that kind of like shit. And he was like the best trader in the world at one point. And now he's basically being like, and he grew up on a council estate. And so now he's trying to teach other people. But people are starting to wake up because they're struggling. And this is where the issue has been in the past, is there's been this very much I'm all right, Jack attitude. It's very individualistic. And we've had neoliberalism, Reagan and Thatcher fucking obsessed with individualistic living. So, like, if you're okay, you don't have to vote for other people. You vote for yourself. You vote if you don't want your taxes to be high, vote this way. Like, it's all very individualistic. And I think that's starting to change. I feel like there's a shift now. I think particularly since COVID, I feel like there's a bit of a like, oh, we don't have to live like this. And I don't know, I just feel like there's a bit of a movement. I don't know if I'm delusional, maybe.
No, I 100% agree with both of you. So, which is no surprise. That's why I'm here. But capitalism creates scarcity. Like it literally has shot itself in the foot, right? Because, like Susanna, like you were saying, like it's a system of commerce that continues to evolve. The gaps continue to get bigger, and because of that, it creates these limitations. It's not a very expansive way to function economically. And I hear what you're saying, Sarah, about like there's, from a very like neutral standpoint, there's like, well, maybe it could work, right? Like there's always that like hope that like, well, it could be redeemed, it could be restored. And I think what comes up for me is like going back to two very specific words in that definition: privately owned, right? Which is part of that neoliberal toxic individualism that Siobhan was talking about, right? And then the unregulation, right? That forces that kind of individualistic type of operation to happen, right? Because if something is unregulated, then the people who are doing the labor have no say in how that thing functions. And from a more collectivist standpoint, from a socialist standpoint, right, as Siobhan was pointing out, like in those types of societies, people have more say, they have more voice in how their industries function, how policies get made, etc. And so you're kind of eschewing that individualistic neoliberal kind of mindset that is like so rampant in capitalism. And so I don't follow, I'm not an economist, obviously. I don't follow a whole lot of economists because so much of them are so embedded in that. And so, but I appreciate your suggestions, Siobhan. I'm going to look that up. But what comes to mind for me, or what, like some alternatives that come to mind for me as a business owner, right? Because as a business owner, it's like, how do you operate your business when you live in a capitalistic society, but you're against capitalism, right? And it's impossible to function as a business owner outside of capitalism, depending on where you live, right? Like here in the States, I cannot operate my business outside of the system of capitalism. Like that's just the reality that I'm contending with. And one of the things that I have been trying to, like one way that I'm trying to adjust my mindset is that the goal is not necessarily to like completely remove my business from the system of capitalism, but the goal is to like lean as far away from it as possible on a day-to-day level, right? Because until this system collapses, there's no way for me to exist outside of capitalism, because your girl's got bills, student loans, right? Like I got to put food on the table, right? And my wife, like she works a 9 to 5 job. She works a traditional job while I try to run my business, right? In this day and age. And so it's that having that mindset, just like it takes the pressure off of like trying to have all the answers all the time, and just focus in on like the little details, the ways that I can run my business in a way that's more values aligned for me, so that at the end of the day, I don't feel like I'm completely complicit in this system. And that whether you own a business or not, I think that's like, for even in my personal life, I'll say that's been a healthy reframe for me, because if you're just trying to like just come up against it all the time, you're setting yourself up for failure, and then you're going to burn out and you're going to lose hope. And that's not where we really need to be spending our energy, especially these days.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought it back here, because I think like when you had originally read off the definition, one thing I wrote down and underlined is this concept of ownership. And in particular, that's what really comes up for me as far as like how to balance being an anti-capitalist and running a business is like, I mean, fundamentally, like you can't. And so then what? And yeah, I do feel like for me, not participating in a standard 9 to 5 is definitely part of how I'm like answering that. But then also, okay, well, if I need to hire a team or expand my operations, then how do I? Okay, so I not participating in a 9 to 5 is like for me one of the answers that like helps me not participate. But when I need to expand my team and hire, how do I not just create the same thing that I don't want to participate in for myself? And what other ways can it look? That's a hard thing to answer.
I think a lot of it is just leading with humanity first, letting people be people first, and letting business come much further down the line. So we can prioritize thriving. We can prioritize rethinking what productivity even means. Art is productive, rest is productive, joy is productive, right? Like, so when you talk about can capitalism be revolutionized as a system, I think no, because if we go back to the definition, the only way that capitalism could ever work protecting more people would be for it to be highly regulated. And it's by definition not highly regulated. And frankly, even if it were, because we now, at least in the United States, have so much money in politics, like there's no way that that would ever happen anyway. However, I do think that we ourselves can be a revolution within capitalism. So not so much revolutionizing the system, but revolutionizing just the way that we run our businesses and run our lives, which is how I think about like mutual aid. I don't donate to nonprofits anymore. I'm like, where can my money do the most good? Where can we each find places where we can turn the system and expectations essentially on their head and do things the opposite way of what is expected of us? Instead of hoarding, how can we redistribute? Instead of that scarcity mindset, how can we think there's enough to go around? Instead of competition, can we think about collaboration? So I like what you said about like shifting mindsets. And I would love to hear of any other mindsets that you all have of like, what is a mindset that we've been taught to come into, especially in business, and how can we flip it? Because I think almost like in this conversation, I'm like, oh, I have these things in the back of my head, but I want to write them down, because it's almost like a personal manifesto of like how to anti-capitalist in business.
I love that so much, Susanna. There's so much I resonate with there. Like, I've been trying really hard for like the last 4.5, 5 years to kind of disrupt capitalism with my business and break this pattern of like this obsession with growth. and how like it's just this exponential growth. We've just got to grow all the time. Everyone's average. We've got to grow. Like it just I mean, the current UK government is obsessed with growth, and like they're like celebrating like a 0.7% GDP growth, and they're like, we're the best in the G7, G8. Don't know what how many, but like I just can't I can't bear it. And you just need enough. Like that's what we need. We need enough. We need enough to be able to pay our bills, to live comfortably, to be able to feed ourselves, to have a roof over our heads. There are other things like having a garden if you can, and being able to grow your own vegetables and do all those kind of things. But you need enough to survive. Like, but there's an obsession with having more, and that hoarding. Like, it's kind of like that kind of six-figure business like obsession. It's like, do you need that? Like, where are you getting that? Are you not paying your teams properly? Like I could I'm not going to for legal reasons name a fair number of coaches, probably not even qualified ones, who are 6 7 figure businesses who don't pay their people properly, who claim to be like millionaires, and they fly on private jets, and they treat their clients to champagne dinners and blah blah blah. But I know they didn't pay maternity pay for their team. They used the government scheme instead. They like were like, oh no, I didn't get that, so you won't get that either. Like, no, if you are a good human and you want to make a difference in the world, you pay your people properly, you pay your taxes, you do things well, and you try to give back to your communities. Sorry, like ran over. But like that for me is I want to do the opposite of that. Like I want to grow communities. I want to, exactly how Susana was saying, like bring that humanity in to my business. So like being more gentle with clients, not having like punitive payment plans. So for the last 4 or 5 years, I haven't had, if I spread the payments to people, there's no charge for that. I incorporate that into the first price. So I'm like, if you want to pay, I don't know, say for example, I'm running a course and it's £1,000 for 6 months or something, I would then break that down, and there would be no punishment for you paying monthly, because just because someone can't afford £1,000 immediately doesn't mean that they deserve to like suffer for that. That's my job to incorporate that into the first price, and offering things like sliding scales, making sure that I'm having things like, as long as I get enough people in paying the normal price of something, then offering a scholarship place or something. So, and not doing, and I'm guilty of fucking myself over with this, but like making sure that I'm taking enough of what I need from something before then offering that kind of like solidarity place. Quite often we're too nice. Like I know that, like, or too kind, rather. I'm not nice, I'm quite cunty. Like there's like we need to sustain ourselves. And is it Bear Heber talks about this a lot in her work. I don't know if you follow her, but she or them, they talk about like anti-capitalist business, and like they are brilliant at, they've got a couple of like mini courses and stuff, but they talk about that in their work, and I've kind of trying to lean into more of that. But yeah, the sliding scale and the non-punitive payment plans, they're my like little fuck you to the status quo. And people don't expect it. People are always like, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, do you mind if I pay over 6 months? And you're like, no. Like actually that's great, because I won't spend all that money immediately. Brilliant, thanks very much. But yeah, I'm just showing you how bad I am at like running my business there. But like I interestingly, I just wanted to go back to like the education around economics. I only really realized how little I knew about how economics worked when I was thinking about standing for parliament in 2018. And I literally was like, oh God, I'm gonna have to have like grown up conversations. Like, oh God, I probably ought to read stuff. So I read Donut Economics by Kate Bacon. Kate Bacon? I just made her Kate Rayworth, sorry. And that is a really, really brilliant book with alternatives to capitalism. And I've gone on like a bit of a like nerdy economics journey just so that I don't feel like a complete twat talking about it. If I'd won my seat, which I didn't, like I wouldn't have felt moronic, basically. Like I didn't want to feel like a child in front of all these old men. But I think it's really important to have that literacy and to try and like understand it, even if it is in just basic terms, like what's growth, what's does GDP stand for, like how does money work, all those kind of questions. There's some really brilliant books. I will make sure that Sarah can put them in the show notes. But yeah, like Yanis Varoufakis, whose name is really hard to say because it's Greek. He's a brilliant economist. He was in the Greek government and he wrote this book called Talking to My Daughter About the Economy. It is such a good book. Such a good book. And in 2018, that was one of my books that I learned lots from because it's written for kids.
I love that rant. I love what you said about growth too, because I think that's where a lot of that like cutting corners and layoffs and like not paying people well and shortcuts and things like that happen. And what a couple of authors that I have been like leaning into in terms of like some of their values or ideas about how to live in a way that's more collectivist. And these aren't business books, but the ideas really resonate with me. And one of those is I bring this up. I also co-host a podcast. It's called the Messy Liberation Podcast. And I think I bring it up at least twice a month on the podcast. And I may have brought it up on another episode with Sarah, but it's the book Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown. And she's a facilitator and a coach and a mediator and an organizer. And the premise of the book is just about how we can look at something like biomimicry to like, and more collectivist ideals to live a life that's like more sustainable, that's kind to the environment and that's kind to other people. And I read that book every year because every year, like I get something else out of it. And Becky and I recently started like a coaches circle community. And so we're going through the book as a collective and like pulling out questions and ideas that we can potentially apply to our business that is coming from an anti-capitalist lens. And the other author is Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she's the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, which she kind of talks about anti-capitalism a little bit, like a more collectivist kind of system in Braiding Sweetgrass. But she recently also published a book called The Service Berry. I have it right here. This is what it looks like. It's a really small book, really easy read. And the subtitle is Abundance and Reciprocity in the Natural World, right? And so she talks about this thing called the gift economy and how in a lot of indigenous cultures, right, when there's an abundance, there's no hoarding. That abundance is shared with the community because it's a collectivist community. And so when you share your abundance with other people, when you share your wealth with other people, you do that knowing that it will come back to you when you have a time of need. And that is what is missing out. Like in a capitalist system, there's no guarantee that when you have need, that it's going to come back to you because it's so individualistic, right? And so there's this hesitancy to give, to share, to redistribute wealth in a way that's more equitable because nobody has entered into this commitment to share their resources in a way that's going to better the entire community or the entire population. And I also just want to point out, like, I remember having conversations with a lot of people that I used to know that I'm no longer friends with, who are extremely conservative because I grew up in evangelical circles, evangelical Christian circles. And when I started to like question things and realize that like, this is not really values aligned for me, just having a lot of conversations about what it could look like to be anti-capitalist. And a lot of people, they hear that and they assume that like you're trying to steal things from other people. And it's like, it's almost like that hands off our guns conversation here in the States, where it's like, no, we just want to regulate the guns. We're not trying to take them away from you. Like, we just want better regulations so kids don't get shot up in schools, right? And so, but there's this fear of like, well, if you regulate it, then that means I lose control, right? I no longer have a say in how my money is used. And that's not really true. Like in a really collectivist, socialist kind of environment, like you're not really losing your access to your own resources. It's about how you choose to access and share those resources. And I think because of the individualism that is so embedded in a lot of our cultures, like that just like really goes over people's heads.
Yeah, this is just giving me so much to think about. And I wanted to mention something that you said, Shaban, that I think really like ties well into what you just said, Taina, which is sometimes I give too much and I'm too nice. Like I want to make sure that I have what I need, and then also like be as kind of generous and accommodating as possible. And I think this is really interesting because this does come up for me sometimes, and this is a very individualistic like way of giving examples. They're very individual examples that come up, but I think this really ties well into the whole like, I mean, of course I run an individualistic business. I like live in an individualistic society. That's what my services are, individual. Like I mean, but I think that there are a lot of examples that have come up in my business where there will be a request, and specifically from a client, that is irritating to me because I think that sometimes there are assumptions being made that even for the like minimal price that I'm getting from that individual client, that I'm going to be able to like drop everything and help them. And then what I have had to do, because when it was just me and I didn't have a team, I got to make the decision of like when I did and did not do that. But now having a team, it's interesting because then I also have to see if my team is willing to drop everything in order to help them. It's not just me making that decision myself. And sometimes I've gotten pushback where then I have to kind of have a conversation of like, okay, so here's really what it comes down to. Yes, there's a question of precedent of like what precedent is this establishing with this client as far as our boundaries go and like maintaining a healthy working environment so that it's sustainable and we can keep going. But also, if what they're asking for is something we literally can do, like then I mean we can just do it. like and and really as far as what is messages that sending, or like what kind of brand promise does that end up looking like, is that is what sets us apart as a small business compared to a corporation, is that like actually we can just in this moment I can drop everything. Now if I couldn't, then I could just be honest about that with a client, right? Like, and then set clear expectations of what I can do in reverse. But and my clients are so freaking understanding. That's also been like an amazing thing in reverse of, if I am on vacation or if I'm unwell, I just had like a really bad asthma spell that is worse than I've ever had. And I kept thinking the whole time, thank God I don't have a 9 to 5 that I'm trying to balance at the same time of doing this, because corporate structures just aren't built for like making chronic diagnoses like livable. But I also noticed that I had an out of office set or like an autoresponder to let people know like, hey, my responses are going to be a little bit delayed. I'm still working, but I'm working slower. And when I see something come through that's not urgent, I'm going to take my time to reply to it because frankly, I have more important things going on, right? And I'm dealing with a medical crisis. And when my clients got those messages, those autoresponders, they were the ones who were canceling our calendar appointments, who were saying like, okay, wait, I just got your auto response, like disregard, I'll handle it. And I mean, isn't that actually the precedent that you're setting when it's like, I mean, what if we can just all treat each other that way? What a gift. So, yeah, anyways, that comes up. I think some other like tangible examples, because I love some of the ones that you all gave as well, have to do for me with like, I don't manage my team's time. And so even when I'm talking to somebody who offers like a contractor thing that is like billable by hour, I like to come up with, can we just agree what the total budget is? And like, I don't want to monitor your hours. I don't want, as long as we agree on the deliverables and the turnaround for those things, and we can communicate like clearly about what is a realistic expectation for achieving the deliverables. I don't really care how you're spending your time. I don't feel like I have ownership over your time, and I don't want to. Like, do it in hours that work for you, when it works for you. I think that's been really good. I know Jackie, who was originally going to be on this call with us, and she had her own medical stuff coming up today, but she has in the past done a thing in her business where like everybody gets paid the same. So anybody that she brings into her team gets paid what she pays herself, and she does not pay herself more than she pays her team. I think that's a really interesting one as well. But yeah, I think generally just questioning like how have things always been done? And so then like, how could I do it differently? What could I just do differently? Why is it done that way? Could it be done differently and still be legal? Like what, I mean, what's the line? So yeah, I think that's interesting. But I mentioned some things that come up for me. I'm curious for you all, and that fast, we're already coming up on time, but I'm curious for you all, how does capitalism impact us differently as small businesses? And especially when we start talking about regulation and things like that, how does that affect us differently as small businesses compared to corporations?
The first thing that comes up for me is like, there's a lot of talk about tariffs these days, right? And so I think large corporations they have more capital to deal with tariffs, whereas a small business, like even if the majority of your products are not being made overseas, like maybe it's just the packaging that you are outsourcing from another company that's outsourcing from a company overseas that is now getting hit with like tariffs, right? Like that's going to affect like your numbers. And it can be wildly different depending on what kind of business you operate. And so I mean, I don't operate like a service or product-based business. I'm a service-based business, but I still have to purchase products for my business, right? So even though I'm not a product-based business, like it still has an impact in how I have to make decisions about what gets prioritized and how I spend my money as a business owner. And as a small business owner who is very people-centered, like I'm a coach, I'm a facilitator, my learning journey is never finished. Like I'm constantly purchasing books, like constantly purchasing books, right? So now I'm like, maybe I should rely on the library a little bit more, right? And I also am really big on gifting my clients things, right? On like going that extra mile and like gifting my clients things that I know will help support them in their journey, whatever their goals are, whether it's personal or professional. And so one thing that I like to do for my clients is like at either the beginning or the end of our journey together, there's a gift that I send them, right? That can include any number of things. And so now I'm like, okay, I have to think about that now. Like before, it was just so easy. I could just be like, put it in the cart, send it off, right? But now I'm like, okay, now I have to rethink how I do that, like how I can do that in a way that, for lack of a better term, is cost effective for me, right? But still is going to have the same impact on the relationship that I'm trying to build with my clients. And so it's just fucking tough out there for small businesses, I think. So we've seen this since I think 2008 and even before. A lot of small businesses are like closing down or putting a pin on it, right? And going back to corporate jobs or nonprofit jobs for the time being to like supplement their income, which if you've ever worked like a traditional job and then also tried to run a business on the side, that shit is not sustainable long term. Never, even if you're like the healthiest person, but if you have a chronic illness or you're a caretaker or you have multiple children or senior dogs like I do, like it wears on you after a while. And so, which feeds into that system of extractive labor. And so it's hard.
I was thinking about something similarly, that we talked about how 9 to 5s aren't conducive to chronic illnesses and things like that. But like, I find that it also goes the other way. So once you have something larger, but the stuff that moves the needle in my business, like I am doing. And so for the past, like, I'm still not 100% back with my voice because I got a cold that turned into 2 weeks of bronchitis. And I'm just coming back out of it. And that meant that those 2 weeks of like no client work, which meant no money. And so as a small business owner, like there's no maternity leave, there's no sick days, so we talk about productivity and how like rest is productive, but I find it more difficult as a small business owner when it's just me to remind myself in the thick of it that that's still true. That like you're going to figure it out, but like you need to go lay down. And so I find that that's an extra, at least from like a labor perspective, an extra challenge within capitalism for small business owners. But the thing I wanted to make sure that I mentioned before we close is this, because we've kind of touched on it tiny bits, is the concept of it takes a village. And like I could fall into multiple rabbit holes of problems and how far we've gotten from that as a society. But I like to think about, and I've been thinking a lot recently about how we can bring the concept of it takes a village to like it takes a village to run a business. And not only thinking about, okay, how can we be anti-capitalist in the way that we run our business and our interactions with our clients, but what about the way that we run businesses like next to each other as fellow business owners? I texted a fellow business owner just this morning to say, like, I got this email from an agency that I subcontract for. They're wanting a quote for something that, like, you do a lot of. Like, instead of me overthinking this all day because I'm so slammed, can you just tell me how much you would charge them with this information that I've been given? And in 2 seconds, she was like, yeah, tell them about this much. And like, you can adjust it up or down based on XYZ factors. And the relief that I felt, because she was generous with her expertise with me in the same way that I've done the same for her a million times, that it's a bartering of the barter economy. It's a bartering of time, expertise, sometimes just like a sounding board, and that not everything has to be a transaction. And I think that if we do that for each other as fellow business owners and create these communities for each other, then we will all be better equipped to serve our clients. And this like collective care starts to build. And that's where the revolution comes.
Yeah, there's something in emergent strategy that what you said just made me think of. And so in one of the chapters, Adrian talks about how when birds are migrating, like, or even when we see like what's it called? When there's not the swarm. Murmurations, yes, thank you. Murmurations, like they're so in sync with each other because like each animal is attuned to like the 7 birds closest to it. And so they're attuned to their emotions and their intentions. And collectively that creates this synchronicity, this like these beautiful murmurations, or helps to get them to their end destination like in a really easy, efficient way. But they also like trade off leading so that way nobody gets too tired. And so I've been thinking about that metaphor for like months now, like how, like who are and it doesn't have to be 7, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 11, whatever, like, but who are the business owners that are closest to me? And that can mean like in terms of values, that can mean like actually geographically, like in terms of like local networks, like, but who are the ones that are closest to me that I can attune myself to and like understand their intentions and their movements so that we can all like we can enter into a mutually beneficial relationship, right? So we can do things like that, like, hey, I'm not sure how to charge here, like what would you say? So there's no gatekeeping, and there's this sense of just access to resources and knowledge and information and expertise that we otherwise wouldn't have, because who the fuck can afford business school these days?
That was so beautiful. I love that analogy, and that flowed so nicely from what Susana was saying. And I think community is it. That's it. That's the answer to fucking everything, isn't it? Like community is the answer. Like full stop. Like creating that community around you, whether it's like for the barter stuff, like I'm currently going through this massive not a rebrand, it's a new brand. My designer pal said to me today. I was like, oh yeah, it is. Whole other story for another day. But like, I've got these two amazing humans who I've been pals with since like one of them from 2018, one of them from 2020. And they're not people that I've lived with or gone to uni with or anything like that. They're like business people who I met on the internet. One's a web designer, one is a brand designer, and they are collaborating on making my new website. And the exchange is I'm offering them my services for as long as they want. I am their word bitch, basically, for as long as they need me, even though I'm pivoting away from that. And I'm going to help them with their messaging or pick up work that they're doing with clients. And it's just a very like flowy thing. Like it doesn't need to be like my services cost £3,500 and your services only cost £800, so I need 3 of those. Like it's really fluid and it feels really lush. Like, but I love that analogy of the murmuration. Like that is going to stick in my head, and I'm going to be picking was it 7? My 7 people. I think I know who they are, to be honest. I love that. What a beautiful way to end our podcast.
Wow. Okay, this is so good. I feel like this is one of those episodes that I can't wait to have the transcript for, and I'm just going to be like coming up with all the lists and all the things and all the ways to try to implement, because I'm productive. So anyway, that's it. That's all we have time for. We could talk about this forever, and we will, because we live in it and there's no choice. So I want to just say thank you to those of you who are on this call with me. If you want to connect with anybody that you heard from, of course, all our information is in the show notes. I'll also try to make sure that I can list as many of the resources and people that we mentioned to follow in the description of the episode as well. But just thank you for being here, for being willing to go with me here, and for you listening. That goes for you too. Thanks for hanging in there with us, and just appreciate you so much. And we'll see you again next week. Bye bye.